So I would like to propose interpretation of some of recent tendencies in art and music, especially the tendency to unify various fields of artistic activity into one field of general art. It's an important part of the contemporary landscape. I think we should know about what happens. The first question is, why do we have different fields of art? This is not such a trivial question, although we think today that everything is cultural. We must first answer that different arts operate on different material or use different physical medium, such sound or light. So there are some natural bases here. But it's not the same medium or material. For example, the spoken word and the melody share the same medium of sound, but they are different material. On the other hand, the medium or the channel of communication is related to senses, like hearing or vision. Recent research takes into account existence of more than 5 Aristotelian senses, like proprioceptive sense, sense of space. It's important when it comes to architecture or sculpture. This was about medium, but the material is not directly related to the senses, but it's a concept of higher level of abstraction, medium and material. For example, melody and harmony are musical material based on the same medium sound, and the material is more flexible to be defined and shaped by the culture. Medium is natural, material is cultural. For example, the sonority or timbre emancipated as material in European music as late as in 20th century, but physically this could have happened in any time in the past. Moreover, it can be argued that the real matter or substance of music is not the sound itself, but emotions, meanings, signification, narration, moral values, or even the spiritual experience conveyed by the piece. I think you already know where I'm going to. At the very high level, the message of a work of art is very general, not material specific, and may converge between different fields of art. The meaning may be communicated using different media and engaging different senses. This convergence already has many precedents in the history, such as the well-known idea of correspondance des arts. From this point of view, artists may share the same ideas, but embody it in various substances. As we know, there are other hypotheses explaining this, like, for example, synesthesia, which is already the subject of much research. For example, some recent studies show that the movement of animated ball on the computer screen and some musical fragments are recognized by people as having the same emotional content. This convergence, emotional convergence between vision and sound, this is very interesting when it comes to the mystery of music signification. Nowadays, such relations can be considered on a larger scale as widely discussed problem of multisensory perception. But I would like to propose yet another view on the problem. Today, the common area of almost all artistic activity is digital technology, mainly computers and software. Today's artistic creativity of any kind is integrated by universal tools, which are derived from digital information technology. We already have had announcements in the past. There were, for example, many attempts to integrate sounds and images into one work of art. So, for examples, we have those in the PDF. In all of these examples, from light harpsichord to xenakis and computers, some type of technology provides the potential for such integration. Technology is crucial. And another example, very significant, in 1992, Bolognini installed several working computers processing images internally, but without monitors. So no one could see those monitors. It is easy to imagine that those computers do not process images, but sounds. In this way, the project moves from conceptual visual work to conceptual musical composition. And now we can see how easy it is today to cross the border between traditionally separated fields of art. It's conceptual. You know? Today, computers are no longer luxury items. Artists use them every day. And this is my statement. Creative tools look very similar regardless of whether we are making music or video. Here we have, for example, software called Sequencer, which allows to set blocks of material, video, or sound on the timeline. So it looks similar. There is also a group of software called visual programming, Max, well-known touch designer, also for performers for video, looks the same. And finally, we have raw coding, writing programs, which looks absolutely the same, not depending on medium. And also the hardware looks the same, like for example, controllers used in live performances, just like traditional instruments in any field, like music, stage light, video, text, image processing, is the same kind of controller. Artists of any kind make extensive use of microcontrollers, like Arduino, famous one, which revolutionized the technique of interactive multimedia installations, performance. So any artistic material is today created and processed with use of very same tools. This strongly affects, in my opinion, imagination and the way we think creatively about material, because the material is raw data and can be transferred to different physical projections. Digital information technology enables one more very important phenomenon, which is generative or algorithmic art. This is common to any kind of art. The main job of the artist is to create just general process, design general process, and the technology like artificial intelligence takes care of the implementation and generates details. This approach is sometimes called meta creation. It is important to remember that digital tools only processes bits of information, zeros and ones, and nothing more. Computers do not process images, but computers process zeros and ones. And these zeros and ones can be transferred to different projections, but I have a better word in mind. Today, all kinds of manifestation, the physical manifestation, those bits can be manifested in different kinds of media. So this allows for very easy conversion between picture and sound. For example, instead of displaying data to monitor, you can send data to speaker and generate sounds. This is an example. Let us take the Polish national epic by Adam Mickiewicz. Here we have the very first words as letters and as bits, but instead of letters, those bits of information can be represented as image, as pixels of image. This is all the book, 500,000 letters. Reading time about 6 hours, all in one picture. And software code for to do this is very simple, as you can see. This is the software which makes it. So I transferred the data to them. But now let's interpret those numbers as information about pitch and brightness of the screen. So the letters. I interpret the letters as sounds. And Polish letters have higher sounds. So you can see here the high sound when the Polish letter appears. Also, the brightness is regulated by letters. So I generated, let's say, music, signification, it's not music, directly from the text. Okay? I would also like to show excerpts from our event, like a big event in accelerator, particle accelerator in Krakow called Solaris. About 60 people from several institutions performed and designed the visuals during the few hours long event. I think communication was possible mainly due to the extensive digital information processing. So now going to the more general reflections. So digital technology makes it possible to realize the great dream expressed by artists 6 years ago. Conceptual art and intermedia have gone beyond the frames of material. Marcel Duchamp and John Cage have joined forces to tear down the limits of art. Finally, later on, Dick Higgins proposed the famous Intermedia Manifesto, and today composers want to be artists. And vice versa, as an audience, very often we cannot say whether the work we perceive is the work of composer or not. Here we have, can I get the details quiet? Here we have 3 of quite celebrated and rewarded Polish young generation composers who show very strong sentiment for artistic performance rather than classical music composition. And we cannot say Other composers or performers, it's a blur. Borders between those fields are blurred. The other way around, many visual artists and performative artists would like to be called composers, just because they use a medium of sound. You can imagine what kind of sounds. Like Jaap Blonk, to mention only one of 1,000 possible examples. In many cases, technology itself is the focus of artistic activities. Technology. As a good example would be the output of Luigi Keda. Here we have his short statement. He talks about direct conversion between data. Let's listen to what he says.
That's why it's just pure conversion of data to sound. You experience in just binary patterns. If you convert even very small email of data onto the language of zeros and ones, binary expression has very interesting patterns.
So he says that you can convert your email into sound. You can convert your email, digital email, into vision. It's very easy. He even says about experiencing digitality. This is a new thing, experiencing digitality, immersive installation, yeah, immersed in the digital realm. And final example, Tristan Peric, who makes use of flexibility of data conversion, which may be presented as graphics, sound, live coding, performance, or printed book. The data can be printed out in the physical paper. Same information, but pushed out to different physical media. This situation has significant consequences. Digital computing unifies creative procedures, blurs the boundaries between fields of art, leads to semantic convergence, where various physical emanations are in fact manifestations of the same deep level of artistic structure. Harry Lehman has already wrote about influence of the digital revolution on music, but I would like to underline that this influence goes far beyond the realm of music itself. Today, the unification of artistic material and procedures has an unprecedented scope. This is a new situation in art. And now, this is very interesting new situation. New artistic perspectives appear. It's new movements. Artists of all fields integrate, work together. Inspirations flows everywhere. It's very optimistic. It was very optimistic. It was more than 2.5 years ago. I wrote a proposal for this conference, and I already presented what mainly I wanted to show here. But since that, I thought a lot. A lot of things has happened, changed. Pandemic, now the war. I started to think more also about former divergence, not the convergence itself, but how did it work before intermedia, conceptual, and finally revolution. So let me complete the speech with such new reflections. In the traditional fields of art, characterized by the material, art itself was also the subject of work. I mean that art also talks about itself, its material and craft. Poe spoke about poetry for the sake of poetry. And similarly, Schoenberg wrote on solving compositional problems for the sake of solving compositional problems. The subject of painting is largely a story about painting. We have some images here. Those images are about what painting is and what painting could be. You probably can provide more examples. The message here is closely related to medium and closely to the material, as well as the craftsmanship in handling the material. This is about craft mostly and what the essence of painting, let's say. Jan Fredrik Verwoerd, a critic and writer on contemporary art, in his critique of conceptual art, wrote words I consider as important in discussion here. He wrote that the very important thing of the significance of work of art is a dialogue with the medium, particular material you are working with your hands, for example. Another artist, Fabien Ferdier, French abstract artist, spent 10 years in China studying how to properly draw lines, Before her master accepted her as a student, she had to prove certain potential. The master accented on moral values related to such an abstract thing like single line, and you can have the quotes. Here. You cannot pursue, go any further if you cannot draw a single line. Thus, the experience of dealing with particular material is specific experience. Being able to draw the right line is something completely different than producing the right sound on the shakuhachi, for example, or performing Chopin mazurkas, or composing fugue. This is a completely different experience. The way a creator deals with specific rules and limitations related to specific material is of great artistic significance. But in intermediate situation, back to the first part, there are almost no such problems. Everyone speaks the same language of art and uses similar digital tools, mostly. There is uniformity in terms of technology. I believe that digital technology, along with the idea of intermedia, are the main reasons for the tendency to diminish importance of material and compositional technique, for example, claimed by some philosophers and artists also. In Poland, for example, many young composers proclaim the death of material quite seriously. The inspiration comes mainly from the writings of the aforementioned Harry Lehmann. An excellent example can be output of Johannes Kajda in Germany and Piotr Peshat in Poland. I don't know if you know, it's good to know that such things happen. Digital technology is strongly democratized. It's very important. Everybody has access to it and knows those tools to a similar degree. Thus, basically, it's not possible to show any special mastery here. Artists use what the software developers provide. The essence of art is ingenuity concept rather than technical agility. This leads to quite general remarks about serious cultural transformations we are observing right now. Today, the idea of perfection or mastery is also subject of critical judgment. I don't know if you know, but it's good to know. As a projection of male and white perception of the world. It's common in critical studies, you can read about it. And this view of the world was perpetuated by centuries of intellectual oppression to which this group, white male, subjected other groups. Evidence of that would be, for example, that the use of political suspicious word master is politically incorrect. Master is like the master of slaves. Something you can read in serious works like Philip Ewell, you know about it. Just as the idea of genius has been critically debated for a long time, it seems that such voices cannot be disregarded because today they constitute an important part of the discourse. Today, young artists, when you talk to them, they do not want to be great. There's not such a problem like being great or being master. They do not want to be recognized as geniuses, for example. But what they do want instead is to influence the society and be active participants in social and political changes. Hence, their artistic activities are often directly programmatic, saturated with direct contents like social justice and so on. Artistic works became more programmatic in nature than formal or structural. The message is directly accessible to the public or accessible through the critical interpretation. In other words, it's important for research, works are more likely to be humanistically interpreted than scientifically analyzed. This situation is also influenced by the criticism of the existing traditional models like res facta, opus perfectum, ad absolutum. Today we prefer dynamic situation of performance, a generative generation or algorithmic generation of sounds live. We are observing this. Nobody's interested in creating item like a work of art which is finished and perfect, for example. Artists prefer to create a live situation than composed finished works. So last slide, I presented here an attempt and their diagnosis to outline few aspects of rather complex situation where digital technology plays a crucial role. Let me paraphrase the humorous formulation of the aforementioned Jan Grimalt. He says that why conceptual artists are painting again because they think it's a good concept. It's very funny. Why are we can also paraphrase this and say that why are intermediate sound artists composing music again? Because without media there's no intermediate. So this is again the QR code if you would like to have this PDF and look into the references. Thank you very much.
back. So that was beautiful, interesting. A lot of at the beginning, I was a little puzzled. I was expecting that you would just enjoy all these new possibilities of digital technologies, and but then comes the human part. Then comes the symbolic part, the creative part. So it's all there. Thank you so much. It was really inspiring. We have time for some questions or comments.
Thank you, Martin. It is always, as usual, inspiring for me. And considering this conceptual artists you mentioned, Johannes Kreidler or Piotr Pesza, thank you, or Spilka Malinowski, we have to also maybe remember about one more context of influence of pop culture. And now I remember the first keynote of Dario Martinelli when he considered exactly on the material of pop songs. But we have to also think about pop culture as a process of creating art, and this proportion of not being composer with a big capital C, yes, but as a part in the machine.
Yeah.
And I think also Pesha or Johannes Kreidler, they are also the medium for the art itself. And this is very pop for me. I don't know if you agree.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Also, in theory of popular music, there's a lot about technology, because technology created popular music, recordings, you know, this industry. It's closely related that technology also makes us democratized its music and also diminished its, you know, I don't want to say value, but aspirations. We don't. It's just like one, I think, was taught, this theories of popular music taught. Yeah, he wrote that popular music is like a chewing gum. You know, do not expect relations here. It's just chewing gum.
And this is only for pleasure. You have to remember.
Distraction.
Martin, thank you very much for so many nuances and topics also. You have double learned profession because you are composer and music theorist. So I think it's very inspiring perspective for us. You mentioned about dialectical formula, I mean medium determined by senses and material determined by culture.
Yeah.
What do you think about the notion of composer? I mean the term, the composer in such new paradigm. I mean digital generation, etc., etc.
This is the question. Because when we say word composer, we have to precise what do we mean, because there are many kinds of composers. As you saw, artists who deal with sound, simply because of that, they would like to be called composers. There are composers also of popular music, of film music, but the traditional notion of composer, I did research on that 4 years ago, came from Latin word, and first it was a composer of visual. For example, painter was kind of composer, architecture was composer. Later it came to the field of music, and composer, of course, composes material. But for example, when we abandoned the term material, or we claim that material is dead, the question is, what do we compose? If you do not have a particular material, there's nothing to be composed. We're just creating performances or actions. We wait what will happen. You saw, for example, here Professor Kołoniewski from our studio, and he says that he's master of imperfection. He says about himself like that. It's paradox. It's a conceptual concept because if something goes wrong, he's very happy. Wow, it goes wrong. I didn't expect that. He's very charismatic. A lot of young people like him because wow, it was so failure, fantastic failure. So where is the success in composing something? Why we say that it's a success? Because when he wants a failure, and the failure happens, actually it's a success. So the notions are blurred today, and we cannot define, I think, the composers other than the historical notion. But wait, I think this wave is already its climax, and maybe we'll see the next landscapes beyond this wave. The next wave. Okay.
Thank you very much. Just one little question. What are you teaching? Marxism?
Teaching very old things or very young. I teach Renaissance counterpoint and very classical harmony, but also contemporary analysis and multimedia analysis. And this all happens today. I mean, technology and the main part of European music, from Baroque to Romanticism. I'm not very specialist in that, so I feel the gap because nobody wants to teach the old things, and there are few people know about the contemporary things.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Yeah, of course. Okay. So I'm wondering always, what consequences does it have for genetic studies of creation? Genetic study, the genetics of text, researchers or the for example, this type of study, genetic study, the manuscript of the composer, etc.
I mean, biology.
Genetic study, genetic study for the creation, up to based on the manuscript of the composer, a creator. This domain is dead for the 21st century. Other method, other method of that. We need to go on now. Okay. Later. Can we go to the discussion later? Okay. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend and former student, Alejandro Mateo, who has this incredible paper. I know this paper, incidentally. But I'm still thrilled to see this new paragraph because Alejandro has already prepared for us. So, without further introduction.
Thank you, Joan.
You're welcome. And thank you very much for your work here. He's a master of technology. Thanks to that, this progress would even go at all.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so good morning. Maybe some of you are wondering what is vaporwave. I'm not sure how many of you know about this genre, but as we don't have much time to get into the details, I share these triptychs with you where you can find more information about it. Anyways, I will situate a bit the genre so you are not completely lost. So, for those of you that are online, you have here a QR that you can access also the triptych that I shared with the people that are here presently. So vaporwave makes me wonder in a very direct way how different techniques of digital post-production applied to the same original source recording can make it deviate into new songs that move around different semantic fields. Since nowadays all contemporary music receive a certain degree of post-production, I find it an interesting genre to understand our perception of meaning expressed through those tools. I'll talk minimally about the genre and its aesthetic, about other states of consciousness, supernatural and cyberpunk tropes, and how they may be suggested through certain post-production tools, ending with some closing thoughts about the subject that we've visited. The community attributes the inception of vaporwave to the 2010 album Echo Jams Volume 1, created by Daniel Lopatin, who considers musical recordings and the tools for sonic edition as musical instruments by themselves, following the trail led by older genres and scenes which use analog media, such as the musique concrete from the 50s, the plunderphonics from the 80s, the chopped and screwed from the 90s, without forgetting the cult album from 2001, Disintegration Loops, by William Basinski that foreshadows foundational aesthetic and conceptual traits of the genre. In its most classical form, vaporwave is produced as follows. The result ranges from a stylization of the very fact of remembering to the creation of uncanny realities that remind us of dreams or hallucinatory episodes, going through the synthesis of music that could fit in cyberpunk universes or that represent technology haunted by paranormal or supernatural beings. In internet slang, the word aesthetics, written like this and just like that, defines pretty much what vaporwave is about. It's a term that the YouTuber Fanjapsi sums up like this ironically.
Living in a junkyard, but you're in a dystopian future, and you find a bunch of VHS tapes, and you're the only person in the world, and everything's lonely, but you have a bunch of weed, and you're high all the time, and you're in Japan, and you're in basically 80s elevator infomercial is digitally slowed down with effects.
The simple action of slowing down a song, sinking it in reverb, adding it in the high end, and mixing it with tape or vinyl noises can evoke an oniric and ambient feeling that we associate with misanthropy, nostalgia, and disenchantment with contemporary society. In fact, that's the birth of the trendy slow plus reverb edits or doomer wave that are blooming on YouTube and that embody the doomer meme archetype, which conveys those exact feelings. But why does that simple introduction work? there are not absolute meanings in music. We find a multiplicity of latent ones that could be present in any sonic combination that can be led and narrowed through certain tools, could be compositional, performative, or post-productional, establishing or reinforcing certain specific meanings. Now, hold that idea for a moment and let's focus on post-production. Mixing audio is a slate of hand process that consists in the combination of multiple sounds into a single stereo channel to simulate a sonic space that articulates discourse through post-production tools. We tend to see these tools as means to enhance the meanings already conveyed by the music, but as we will see, they hold some recompositional power that is being exploited by nowadays musicians, producers, or even sound engineers. To transform or convey new meaning by the process itself. Post-production affects the original audio source in three main ways, as I think. Tonal distortions, such as reverb, saturation, equalization, etc. Temporal or structural distortions, loops, copy or cut and paste, etc. And localization in the artificial space of the mix, through volume and stereo panning, but heavily influenced by the frequency content and the use of reverbs, delays, or compressors. Okay, so let's go back to meaning. How can those tools actually work to produce it? In the past, our ancestors articulated musical meaning through a vast array of appropriations, influences, or references to different scenes, mainly from the mainstream source of music in their lives, like the church, the theater, or the dance hall. Nowadays, the basics aren't too dissimilar, but the arrival of the digital era brings us other tools and techniques that change the game drastically. Digital tools contribute to a change of aesthetics and of means to convey meaning. As Haraway pointed out in her Cyber Manifesto, microelectronics, which we could understand today as digital tools, are the technical basis for simulacra or for copies without original. That means that when the traditional musician tended to mimesis, or at least had a mimetic intent and the imitation of reality, the digital music producer simulates it. Where the traditional musician interprets and mirrors, the digital music producer samples and builds virtual simulations of hyperreal scenes or spaces. Like in the past, our mainstream entertainment fits our articulation of musical meaning. The ways of editing audio movies, series, or video games configure slowly a usually subconscious library of vocabulary, techniques, and signs and tropes that articulate contemporary musical expression. In fact, the very same use of softwares and plugins in different media, as the previous presenter explained, take the process to unavoidable coincidences. As you will see, I won't refer at any moment to topic theory per se. Anyways, I feel it remains open the possibility to enhance my approach, but I'm still struggling with it. In any case, I believe that vaporwave moves around these three main semantic fields: the other states of consciousness, cyberpunk, and the supernatural or the uncanny, with all these overlapping. In fact, the other state of consciousness is a form that goes through and connects all of them. In cyberpunk and the supernatural usually are represented through associations with an outer conscience. We'll see that there are four principal strategies to situate us in those semantic fields. The assimilation, that is a faithful representation or copy of reality. For example, when you record a forest and you insert it in your song. Simulacra, that is a pretension of reality or the creation of a new reality through a shared combination of signs. For example, when you record multiple sounds from different forests and create a new one non-existing. Mimesis, like in the examples that we've seen before, and metaphor or analogy. For example, when you try to simulate a forest by playing different versions with a synthesizer and imitating the wind going through the leaves with modulating white noise. So let's explore how post-production can be used to convey an altered state of consciousness. Now, the visual culture, they are conveyed orally mainly through the simulation of auditive hallucinations using delay, reverb, or other distortions such as the phaser, or referring to changes in perception of proximity and spatiality, usually with the use of compression. Another perception of time can be simulated by slowing down, speeding up, or looping a recording. Finally, the creation of disjointed mixes distort our sense of reality through messy, eclectic, and layered constructions. Audiovisual mainstream uses all of this pretty often.
Just relax and get some.
As seen, altered states of consciousness are more frequently explored or represented in media through drugs. Vaporwave is more commonly related to LSD and psychedelics and the purple drug and other tranquilizers. Okay, so if we notice that LSD's most common effects are an altered perception of time, multisensorial hallucinations, and unusual thought patterns, how are they represented in music? During an LSD trip, time seems to stretch out, repeat, stop, or change in velocity. This corresponds to some of the post-production tricks we've already seen. Sometimes a pitch shift will convey metaphorically as pitch shift, since a slowed down tape will sound lower in pitch, and a sped up one higher. The use of modulating or disjointed reverbs and delays, apart from simulating aural hallucinations, can also represent metaphorically time alterations. That is because a delay creates a sort of short and fading loop, and as we will see later, reverbs have related connotations with infinity and being outside of time. The use of phasers, reverbs, delays, distortions, or even modulating pitch shift can also evoke by analogy changing objects and the perception of colorful or fractal auras around them. A delay with a long feedback and a messy layer mix could also serve as a metaphor to spiraling downwards or circular thoughts. Let's take, for example, the song All Night Every Night by Mesh. The song samples a club mix of the 90s dance hit by Cathy Dennis, Touch Me All Night Long. It starts with a stretched down loop of the synthesizer introduction that will repeat almost non-stop throughout the song. Syncopated delay is introduced early, generating a sweet counterpoint in the left and right channels, evoking the feeling of circular thoughts or an altered perception of time. These mass sparkling and dizzying effects could remind us of the first 30 minutes after being intoxicated by a psychedelic drug. The samples of the voice are pitch shifted sporadically, giving the sensation of an aura that wraps the deep voice and contributing metaphorically to the feeling of an altered perception of time. Sometimes the samples will be repeated interrupted, reversed, or even frozen. Escalating in a similar way to an LSD trip, with the hardest peak exactly in the middle of the song, stopping everything in a psychedelic lush ambient distortion of the samples. Which slowly descends again with an inevitable allusion to the feeling of paranoia that sometimes peaks during the calm down phase, by saturating and beat crashing uncomfortably the loop of a menacing phrase. Thus, the song becomes a simulacrum of an LSD trip. In parallel, purple drug and other tranquilizers produce lethargy, dullness, dizziness, and body dissociation. Slowing down songs and the use of low-pass filters can simulate or even produce lethargy and dullness, whereas disjointed delays, reverbs, and loops induce a feeling of dizziness and can represent metaphorically body dissociation for their spectral connotations. Let's take, for example, the song Waiting for You by Telepath, which samples Warren Hill's smooth jazz song, Your Place on Mine, slowing it down, looping it, syncing it in reverb and delay, compressing it, and layering it in a way that creates some phase problems, making it lose its high frequency range. All these processes make the song soporific, creating that particle drag effect, emphasizing the feelings of nostalgia, misanthropy, and as well exploratory, adding a quality of haunted uncanniness. In songs like this, we're usually immersed in quotidian simulacra, like dozing off in front of the TV, listening to old records, or walking around in the mall. Those landscapes are spiced up by sonic distortions, which used in certain fashions add a veil of unreality that deforms them into uncanny, dreamy, immersive experiences with a supplement of unreal and hallucinatory elements. These associations have been reinforced by their use in mainstream audiovisual language, so that when we listen to music with those characteristics, we evoke an altered state of consciousness. Let's move now to cyberpunk worlds. So, in cyberpunk, the machines, and especially the artificial intelligences, have a supernatural quality. In science fiction and horror movies, ghosts and intelligent machines usually are represented through glitches and interruptions of the natural flow of things. Phasers, bit crashers, and low-pass filters evoke all tapes quality losses, whereas the addition of pink or white noise simulates their distortion or the acoustic range from radio waves. Looping and cut and pasting recreate the effect of a broken record of tape, which skips and stutters, producing a haunting groove, unpredictable and somewhat disturbing. These effects hold two semantic powers. On the one hand, they produce nostalgia for being sounds associated with past times and with lost listening rituals, and on the other hand, they can function as markers of retrofuturistic tropes, since all technology is present in cyberpunk worlds since the 80s and has been used ever since to embody the sounds of the machines from their decaying worlds. The quantity of grain and glitch present in a recording affects our perception of it. A recording with a lot of grain and low quality, besides of evoking old music, played through an old or maybe defective sound system, contributes to the creation of an unrealistic aura. A crystal clear recording that hides its reduction tools will be felt as a more modern and faithful representation of reality. A glitch indicates faulty technology. It produces discomfort for its association with error, something that needs fixing. It induces to anxiety and confusion, because it shows that the machine is not an unquestionable extension of humanity, and it seems to act on its own. That's why many science fiction or horror movies use it to simulate haunted machines. Nowadays, it has become also a symbol of dystopian technology for the already explored cyberpunk tropes. Yesterday, after attending the stimulating presentation by Professor De Castro, that is not here, about he proposed a machine topos, that I wonder how much of this would enter under that umbrella. Maybe some of you have some thoughts, and I would like to share it after the presentation. The process of sampling is a double phantom. On the one hand, it acts as a ghost from the past, because it brings an object from the past, sometimes forgotten. Its use speculates about a lost future, where that song still lives and interacts actively with the world of the living, emphasizing the feelings of nostalgia, a process evident in Doomerwave and certain vaporwave songs that sample recognizable portions of a song. On the other hand, precisely when we ignore that direct quote to the original material, it becomes a digital ghost. The contextualized sonic data that becomes styles for a mosaic, and which acousmatic nature reminds us of anonymous virtual presences that don't have material counterpart and sometimes act on their own. For example, I sampled this famous song by Miguel Bosé and converted it into a haunting moan that becomes the leading motif for the song. This way of sampling is directly linked to cyberpunk. It holds an enormous subversive power. It assaults dominant musical forms, fracturing musical language itself, because even when internally it can behave cohesively in terms of form, harmony, or rhythm, it breaks our expectations and opens unavoidable discussions about the ontology of music and what we consider a musical creation. By its appropriative nature, it also serves a very cyberpunk type, displaying big multinationals and recognized artists by stripping portions from their songs and recontextualizing them in hypertext that many times are ironic, absurd, or senseless. Since some artists have been even able to sell them, for example, the original choral shop by Macintosh Plus that is completely created by samples, reaches right now a selling price of almost $3,000. It ends up questioning the capitalist system itself and the concept of intellectual property in music. Check out how the producer Local News endlessly loops an unresolved build-up of a Frank Sinatra song in an effect that becomes absurd, hilarious, unnerving, and even boring, still in the climax of an excited song that talks about winners.
Winner. Here's to the winners. Here's to the winners.
And it goes on like this for 3 minutes. This movement, if not being directly disrespectful towards the singer himself, it holds some unquestionable acid towards these great discourses and figures. The selection of certain samples is fundamental for the representation of a cyberpunk environment in music. Thanks to the parents of the genre in movies like Blade Runner, the soft jazz from detective film noir movies, and the music, Asian culture, rain, and big cities are recurrent tropes in the sounds of their universes. Introducing samples from these musical genres or sounds, post-produced with some of the mentioned techniques, strengthens this aesthetic relationship. Moving briefly towards the supernatural and the uncanny, the use of big reverbs and long delays is connected to empty and liminal spaces, which by analogy extends to feelings of existential angst, nihilism, and uncanniness, because those spaces could make us feel that way. But they also can evoke the luminous, representing boldly spiritual or supernatural presences. This happens because both empty spaces and spiritual places of worship usually sound naturally with reverb and echo. By analogy, since these spaces are associated with infinity and being outside of time, those acoustic traits become signifiers for infinity. In this direction, the human voice, when altered, becomes a very uncanny feature, familiar but strange and monstrous at the same time. In vaporwave, the stretching of samples results in uncanny, asexual, strange voices that, when mixed with the luminous effects of reverb and delay, situates these songs in the semantic fields of the monstrous and the supernatural, evoking boldly demonic and paranormal presences. This has been represented many times in audiovisual mainstream and holds a close connection to the representation of other states of consciousness. Anyway, in this audiovisual context we're living, it's almost impossible not to feel this Macintosh Plus song connected to a supernatural technologic being from a cyberpunk dystopia. It's a distorted love song, slow, fragmented, and broken like an inaccessible memory or a distant ghostly presence trying to connect with the present. Meanings that unravel through the smooth jazz noir feeling, the skipping and stuttering groove simulating a haunted device from a lost future, the supernatural deep voice from a luminous presence, and the incoherent and desperate loops emanating nostalgia. So, to finish, the experimental and eccentric use of post-production in order to evoke these tropes in music tries to imagine what it is like to perceive the world from a non-human point of view. This, even if it can feel contradictory, I believe is a humanizing gesture. It's actually the basis of the posthumanist philosophies of thinkers like Braidotti that see our current situation of digital symbiosis and advanced capitalism as an opportunity to redefine what it means to be human, who we want to be, and reframe our vision of the world in order to be more inclusive and less anthropocentric. Anonymity and fluidity in cyber genres is a protection that allows a carefree expression, creating a safe place for divergent people in which they can finally feel identified apart from the oppression of the heteronormative. Perhaps for this reason, we find on the scene representatives of authority belonging to oppressed groups. For example, hidden among an infinity of pseudonyms like Macintosh Plus, Vector, Intelligence Limited, etc., we find the trans woman Ramona Andra Xavier, that is one of the pillars of the genre. In mainstream culture, heroes always defeat the otherness of the monster in order to recover a normative and static state. Fictional monsters are seen as an inhuman expression only because of their divergence. We see those monsters representations of otherness from the point of view of the Occidental heteropatriarchy. The existence of the concept monster can be an expression of ignorance. A monster is something that we don't understand. It's more difficult to fear what we know. Learning to love what's different, to see through their eyes or even normalize them, leads us to a new expression of love and understanding. We need to reinforce empathy and respect. Follow the direction which accepts physical deformities, the gender spectrum, and any expression of sexual orientation. We need to remain open and respectful towards different social, religious, and cultural expressions of life, even if we don't agree totally with them. It is starting to permeate into artistic representations, as we've seen in some of the examples, following the direction, for example, with the science fiction novelist Becky Chambers, that we have transitioned from the anthropocentric Lovecraftian tale that feels horror towards the alien to its acceptance. All these simulated expressions teach us how to behave and how to live in front of a different mind or body. The otherness of vaporwave in its post-human expression serves as a training and reflection towards our humanization, or maybe post-humanization. Nowadays, it's difficult to know what's real or synthetic in a recording, but that shouldn't be seen as an expression of something less human. The binomial natural versus artificial is an anthropocentric one, and over time it is less and less substantiated as post-humanist studies argue. Faced by this reality, we are humbled, forced to control our instincts of fear and rejection, and to step forward towards understanding of otherness. The artificial or synthetic is a valid option that pushes our limits of what we conceive as strange, serving as a practical exercise to train humility and teaching us to be more tolerant and understanding. Becky Chambers, in her book The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, gives us this very brilliant quote that we could apply when dealing with these divergent forms of artistic expression. Do not judge other species by your own social norms. So, if you want to know more about the subjects that I've treated here, I give you some of the references that I've used. And if you would like to continue arguing with me about this subject, you can check me on these social networks. I worry that I'm mainly a musician, so you will find mainly about music and not so much about music theory or musicology. But you're open to talk with me if you want. Thank you.
This is really impressive. I'm afraid we don't have.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, we do have afterwards, but now we have to go on. If we really have 4 papers in this session, otherwise we will take the time to somebody else.
Yeah.
So Paulo Chagas, I think is online.
Yes.
Paolo, bom dia.
You are muted, Paulo.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so can I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I will share my screen, and let's see here. So just a minute. So this is the title of my presentation: Sound Imaginations, Listening Cultures, and Audiovisual Immersion. And this is about research that I started 2016 and has many components, has scholarship, has field research, and artistic creation. So I will present first the theoretical background, and then I will talk about the process, and then I'll talk about the result. Okay, so the first question is sound as listening. How do we perceive sound? And so the idea is that we are immersed in an acoustic environment. And the idea that everything can resonate belongs to the mythological roots of Western music, extended back to antiquity. So we have, for example, the idea of the music of spheres, and so many ideas that are related to the fact that we can only exist in an acoustic environment. And this is a quote from Douglas Kahn. Sound is pervasive. All space becomes indelible, inaudible, or pervasively filled with voices and sound waiting to be heard. That's the idea that we can only communicate if we assume there is an acoustic space. Otherwise, there is no place for subjectivity. For example, the American military, they use sound as a tool for torture. So they play in the prisons very loud sounds, and they eliminate the possibility that we will listen to each other, and this is eliminate the subjectivity. And this is sound, it's a very strong tool for torture, especially on the US military. So, and then I turn my attention to Xion, which becomes a very important scholar in the relationship between sound and image. So he defined 3 modes of listening. The first is causal listening, consists of listening to a sound to gather information about its cause or origin. So, for example, we listen to a car passing on the street, we listen to a bird, and then we see, oh, there is a bird somewhere, there is a car passing here, so that's a causal listening. So we connect the sound to the origin of the sound, how the sound is produced, what produced it, or who produced the sound. Then semantic listening, it's about language. No? We interpret the meaning of acoustic message through language or some kind of code, no? Or some kind of drums, but there is a code that connects the acoustic message to the meaning. And then the third mode is the reduced listening, which is derivated from the musique concrète from Pierre Schaeffer. And so focus on the traces of the sound itself, regardless of its cause and meaning. So we are not concerned how the sound is produced, what produces the sound, but we are concerned about the sound itself, and we eliminate the cause, we eliminate everything that make the sound recognizable. That's the principle of musique concrète, and that's become also, it's known as under the concept of acousmatics. So, and then another way to see sound is to see sound as a discipline. How we understand sound. It's not about listening, it's about sound, it's the meaning of sound in a certain context. So the modern technology radically changed the way we produce and consume sound. We have now in 2021, 15 billion mobile devices operating worldwide, and this is growing, right? So there is new areas of sound understanding to which we need to find the right approaches and methodologies. And this is, I bring here an idea by Wittgenstein. He says that sound is just the surface of music, that sounds can hardly be described by philosophical models or scientific theories, that the music has a much deeper meaning on depth, and sound is just a surface. So it's a way that you understand sound as an interface, as a surface to some meaning that beyond what we listen. And so according to Wittgenstein, so we can only understand sound and music and sound from the perspective of how we use it, how we put in a certain context. Everything okay? You can hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, it's clear? Okay. So, and so in the last 20 years, sound studies became something very significant as a discipline. What is sound studies? Sound studies investigated the material production and consuming of sound, noise and silence, and how this is connected to our history and our culture. Sound studies should not follow a single methodology, but a plurality of interdisciplinary approaches. So this Stern, he's a important scholar in sound studies, and he edited the Sound Studies Reader. So he proposed the neologism of sonic imagination. And with this neologism, he wants to emphasize how sound observation occupies an ambiguous position between sound culture and a space of contemplation outside. That means sound is not just what we listen, but something that we imagine. So, and yeah, and there is the two other approaches of sound that became also very popular, that are soundscape and acoustimology. So soundscape refers to the sonic environment and includes not only the natural environment of sounds, but also the entire culture that characterizes the sonic environment of any specific space or object of study. This is Maurice Schaeffer, that he created this idea of soundscape, and he has been criticized a lot because people say that soundscape to correlate sound to image, soundscape to landscape, it's not completely accurate, because sounds is much more fluid than a landscape. So one revision of the soundscape was the acoustimology. So it entails the combination of acoustic and epistemology, which focus on the sound as a modality of knowing and being on the world. So it's not just physical stereos that are perceived, interpreted by human actors, and can investigate with significance by those whose bodies and lives resonate with them in social time and space. So it's an interpretation that includes the human actors and how they interact with the sonic environment. So he did a lot of research in some cultures and how sound becomes some significant to define a specific culture. So for my project that calls Sound Imaginations, no? That's a little bit, I took the idea also from Stern, sonic imaginations, but this is a sound imagination. So I put some research questions. How do different cultures have different approaches to listen? How do different human beings listen in different ways? And third, how do we hear the acoustic environment, living beings, surrounding machines, architecture, natural and cultural spaces? So, and for that, to answer these questions, I look for some scholarship, and I found a German scholar, Heinz Schutz. Oh, no, it's not Heinz, I forgot his first name. Schutz, he lives in Denmark, and he teaches somewhere in Denmark, and he edited some books on sound studies, and he proposes 7 categories of listening. The idea of listening cultures. So 7 categories of listening cultures, not listening. So it's related to culture. Listening culture of relationships, the sonic phenomena that shapes the layers of coexistence between human beings, animals, plants, and machines. All kinds of relationships. How these listening cultures are related to relationships. Then listening cultures of work. Cultures of evaluation, collective work rhythms, auditory cultures of technology. So it's include all kinds of machines, of course, and all kinds of technology there. But not just the technology itself, but how this technology leads to some evaluation, to some collective behavior. And listening cultures of entertainment. Popular cultures of entertainment, rituals, sonic cultures of the body. Number 4, listen cultures of protest, presence of political activity through noise, singing, talking, oral forms of protest. Number 5, listen cultures of violence, sonic violence, impairment of the sense, connections to drugs and working cultures. We just saw something related to that, the former the previous presentation, right? So listen cultures of no sound, sounds that are not perceived by human beings, that unheard, the unsound. And finally, the future of listening. Listen as an active process, the diversity of material and sensorial listening cultures, embodiment and disembodiment of listening. So based on these 7 categories, so relationships, work, entertainment, protest, violence, no sound, and future of listening. So I found that this is really interesting, the idea of culture of listening and how this is connected to different realms of life and of society and projects in many different ways. So and then I did, that's the second part of my research, was to do field research. And then I purchased an equipment consisting of a video camera, Insta360 1X, different tripods and accessories, battery, chargers, etc. And then I purchased also a multi-channel audio recording, sound device, premix, batteries, carrying bags, chargers, and all the stuff to carry the things. It's a portable. And then a ambisonic microphone. Ambisonic, it's a form of encoding sounds that creates that encodes the sound from according to 3x, the vertical, the horizontal, and the z-x. So
Excuse
we have
me.
a spheric.
Excuse me, Paulo. As a chair, I should remind you that you should finish as soon as possible.
I have 50 minutes from the beginning.
Well, yes, but if we should have time for questions,
But I just talked 50 minutes. So you want me to finish here? I can finish. Okay.
No.
No, I can stop here and that's it.
No, don't stop. But it's only.
No, but I was told to talk to 25 minutes and I prepared 25 minutes. So now what do you want me to do?
Well, 20 minutes would be very good.
Okay.
I just wanted to announce.
I asked before and you told me 25 minutes. Okay, that's okay. Okay, so then I will go for quicker here and I'll finish as soon as possible. So this is the equipment. And so this is the areas where I did my research in São Paulo. And then was in California, in Riverside. I was in Moscow. And then I went to Germany, to Pune in India. So was during 6 months. And this is the methodology. I was interested in first-person methodologies. This is related to the neuroscientist Francisco Varela. And I'll go here quick, and I will not do anything else because this is not possible. So this is the first person subjective experience. And this is some photos of my research. The microphones, the camera. This is in Moscow. This is in India. So, and this was the audiovisual immersive installation. How I did that. So the software, how I work. And this is how I edited the software. And this is how to edit the 3 videos. And I produced 89 videos. And then I create 14 videos for the exhibition. And there was a multi-channel 7.1 system, a system of multi-channel visual projection. There is a large screen and 12 video monitors. And yeah, that's the artistic concept, is aesthetics of audiovisual immersion, 3D rotations, changes of perspective, reshaping, the flow of 3D image generate vertiginous movement, and multiple relations of synchrony and non-synchrony between sound and image. And these are some ideas about the idea of sound imagination. And that's it. Thank you very much. Okay, I finish.
Obrigado, Paulo. And excuse me for interrupting you. Is there any question? Any comment?
Yes, I have a question. Excuse me, it seems to be very interesting. And could you tell me the conclusion on the cultural level? What is your conclusion about these different approaches?
The conclusion. In which sense, in terms of theoretical or practical? What where you proceed specific question? So what is your?
Yes, you have presented different approaches with 7 categories, and the listening cultures and this kind of approaches, of your approaches, future of listening, listening cultures, and so on.
So what I presented is research. I try to present this in this installation. So different approaches at the same time. So I'm not, you know, the idea is to consider the idea of listening cultures under different perspectives, and also to put these different perspectives simultaneously. So this is the idea. So this is to create a sort of uncertainty and the idea that we are faced with very different ways of listening and seeing, and the idea that sounds induce us to some imaginations, and some image induce us to some sounds. So I'm more concerned to the idea that we can reverse these categories, and by relating things that are apparently different, we can create create some movements that pierce and traverse the different categories. That was my interest, mainly the interest. So I'm very interested in the relationship between listen and see, and how these things affect each other. So, and that's if I would have time, I would show some videos. But so, and then you see that when you see something, you imagine some sounds. When you listen to something, you imagine some things. And these two categories, they interfere with each other, and that's the frictions between these different modes of perception. And also these different categories, also how they traverse each others and they influence each others. That was my conclusion. So in terms of that, if I can say that.
Thank you.
It's a multimodal and multisensorial reality that we face. Listening is not just something that we do with our ears, but we imagine sounds, and so recent also. This is in line with recent research on neuroscience that is very focused on the imagined sounds. For example, when we work in Zoom, like we are doing now, we are playing music in Zoom, for example. No? So there are some sounds we don't listen, but we imagine it. If you try to synchronize the two people play in the same time in a virtual space like the Zoom, that's not possible. People that you listen all the notes, but you imagine some sounds. So I think the technology today, especially the network audio today, shows us that that listening. It's not just what we listen, but what sounds can induce us to imagine something, and this becomes really crucial in today in a telematic situation, when it is impossible for you. If I'm playing here and you are playing there, we cannot synchronize, but we can create a sort of synchronization by imagining and by anticipating some behaviors and by taking some cues from what we see and what we can imagine. This is very important today, because this is becoming to the fact that we have delays today, that we have this the latency today in the communication. So becomes very, very evident that we are not together. We are only when we share a space together, so we can listen together. Otherwise, we can't. And so there is a very strong component in the listening that is related to our imagination. And our imagination is related to contexts and to different categories that of relationships and of situations that we live.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for this fascinating and profound reflection on listening and its human consequences, and also on this radical theoretical exploration of all this. And now I am very pleased to welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Welcome Carlos Villar Taboada from the University of Valladolid. I am very, very pleased that you're here. Thank you for coming. And he's presenting a piece by José Luis Turina, 1978, Crucifixus.
Thank you very much. It's not a piece, but a commentary or a reflection on a piece on contemporary creation. Good morning. Sorry, I have this. Thank you. Thank you all very much for being here. I'm grateful to the organizers. Allow me to congratulate you for the result of this conference. It's extraordinary, the work you've made here with your team is something excellent. And thanks to the scientific committee for allowing me to participate in this conference. After the pleasure of having listened to so many masterful lectures, I will be very grateful for any comment you want to make me after this presentation, because of course, I followed the aim of improving my proposals, and I realize that I have still much to do and really much to learn. Crucifixus, 1978, for strings and piano is a composition by José Luis Turina, written to compete in the 5th Golden Harp Prize of Composition and to commemorate the centennial of the birth of the Spanish composer Conrado del Campo, one of the leading figures of the so-called generation of the 1998, the same to which belonged Joaquín Turina and Manuel de Falla. He did not win the prize, but the piece was premiered the 30th of January of 1979 by the Spanish Radio Television Orchestra conducted by José María Franco Gil, and it was soon published and recorded, both in LP and after in CD. Well, José Luis Turina de Santos belongs to a family with a long artistic tradition, with several painters and composers, including his paternal grandfather, who was Joaquín Turina, a nationalistic generation colleague of Manuel de Falla, as I just told, and one of the most internationally acclaimed Spanish composers of his time. José Luis carried out his musical career since the end of the 1970s and has developed a brilliant career as a composer, leading to the Spanish National Award in 1996. The composer Tomás Marco firstly included Turina de Santos within a general history of 20th century music, 20th century Spanish music, and rated his creations as a hope for his generation, describing him as a very subtle creative personality, with exceptional natural gifts and those of other great contemporary composers. He compared him to Cristóbal Halffter or Francisco Guerrero Marín, two authentic giants in the Spanish panorama, and I think in the European or international panorama. An inclination to reinterpret the historical music tradition, as well as the use of structures inspired by linguistics and literature, is a concern which covers the whole Turina's catalog. Marco acknowledges a recurrent features of José Luis Turina's style, the ability to combine structural rigor and expressive strength, and those tendencies were already present in the early Crucifixus, Turina's first significant work, a finalist of the mentioned prize, which have also determined the biased judgments written in the historiography on his global production since then. Fernando Cabañas and Marta Cureses pick up the ideas of expression and structure linked to the dialectics in Turina's aesthetic world. Cureses considers that the composer has written works that speak for themselves and that they need no meta-language, but for the technical explanation of creative processes. Meanwhile, Itziar Lucas ties Turina's mature style to an uninitiated aesthetic affiliation to the new Polish composition school, that of the sound mass music, extraordinarily influential in the treatment of sound in color, and which since the 80s, coincidentally the years marked as the starting point of Turina's own idiomatic definition and the starting point of Crucifixus, has evolved into the development of certain meticulous timbral and constructive procedures showing considerable attention to instrumental performance. The identification of the rereading of historical music heritage is a genuine creative strategy in Turina's music. In addition to the eventual recovery of classical formalizing principles, several revisions of Occidental revisions are established by means of resources such as paraphrase and variation, which are both utilized as much more effective devices than quotation to compose homages and to establish fruitful dialogues with bygone repertoires. This paper explores some of the consequences of creating new music from former masters and former times, a compositional strategy internationally widespread amongst contemporary composers and usually assimilated by scholars into postmodern stanzas. Particularly, José Luis Turina joins the relation of synesthesia between music and painting, the dialogue to past with its idea of homage and quotations. Regarding to painting and synesthesia, it is useful in this case the example of both the familiar and the music works based on paintings. For example, in his family environment, Joaquín Turina Areal, the great-grandfather, was a costume-based painter of the Andalusian school, and these are some of his paintings in a very costume-based or folkloristic way. In the very same familiar environment, Joaquín Turina Pérez, the grandfather, was the composer of the generation of the 98, and he was also an amateur painter. He has a father and a brother, Joaquin, who are also professors of drawing. And with that kind of history, familiar history, it's easy to understand that Turina is very interested in composed music based on paintings. Some examples are Ofelia Muerta, since the Joffre Never Millet, Ophelia, from Shakespeare, from Hamlet. Exequias for choir and orchestra is a kind of homage to the death of Fernando Zobel de Ayala. Maybe here we can see a kind of darkening. Allò is for Manuel Hernandez Monpó, another painter of the avant-garde period. Here we can see some cubist paintings. The Viola Concerto is dedicated to Oscar Dominguez. Oscar Dominguez is another painting, this one more linked to surrealism. The same case as Salvador Dalí, for whom he wrote 4 etudes in form of piece with an evident click on Satie also. Persistency of memory, or Magritte, the collective invention Two paintings by Marc Chagall are two small pieces for violin. This one, the green violinist, it has another violinist afterward. The case, what happens with this kind of inspiration in painting? What has to do? Well, the reality is that a very little point of starting point, because it's just the beginning of the creative process, usually without any kind of parallelism at the level of structure elements or articulation of the piece. If we listen to this one, if we see the score, there's no violinist, nor green, nor blue in this score. Die Wiensbraut, after Kokoschka and Almonalia, is other of the later compositions written on paintings. There is a unique case in which painting and a technical procedure in painting is translated to music. Is the case of Pentimento for orchestra. I have a paper that's published on that subject, and Turina, what makes there is an interpretation of the Pentimento technique in music. So a quotation of Wagner is found at the middle of the piece because the piece was written in paper, which had that Wagnerian piece before. That's the tale Turina gives us to understand the piece. Crucifixus has to do with the Christ crucified by Diego Velázquez, and is a very iconic painting in the history of the Spanish tradition. And I think that the most important thing about that is the fact that all this program is presented during the transition, a period of time in Spain between Francoism, dictatorship, and democracy, during which composers, artists in general, had to be careful with authorities in order to don't have problems with them. Well, the other subject is are the dialogues to the past. When Paul Griffiths presented his critical reading about music after 1965, he described it as a havoc of heterogeneous tendencies, among which a reconciliation with the inheritances of the past began to be clear by 1974. Since then, poetic games around the semiotic implications of grasping different elements from past musical periods have turned into an assiduously frequented topic among contemporary repertoires that offer a diversity of possible treatments and open a wide spectrum of solutions. With disparate successes, all of them revolving around a crucial axis that can be identified through dialogue with such meanings. The perception of musical time, closely dependent on expectations and memory, is necessarily configured in a subjective manner. It becomes real as a sum of data, an amount of information that is incorporated into memory. Memory is experience by means of sensitive nature of sound discourse. And the use of compositional strategies such as synesthesia, allusion, collage, or quotation facilitate the construction of a symbolic illusion that breaks with objective time. Semanticity is uncountable. By concealing past and future, memories and expectations in a flow, the elasticity of which leads to semantic proliferation. A stimulating insight into contemporary creation points out that a characteristic net of musical postmodernism besides the practice of technical criticism and the search for communication with the listener and the composer, lies in transgressing boundaries, in reformulating the attitude towards the past, a past which is revisited through solutions such as evocation or quotation. Contrary to what is usually stated on the matter, Tarasti considers that the collage technique in music and by extension, its back to the past component cannot be regarded as justifiably postmodern, because since the 70s, it has become part of the mainstream of musical creation, becoming yet another conventional resource, albeit a moderate one. However, by appreciating the reluctance that the term postmodernism generates, perhaps the relevant view is not so much whether a trait is a postmodern or not, as much as if it bears witness to a musician's desire to reformulate the compositional strategies to generate and explore channels of communications. The explicitness of the poetic in José Luis Turina provides multiple examples of that in his production. It's not strange there are authentic recreation of topics. His 400 Fantasia para piano refers to Mozart's Don Giovanni and revisits this opera in paraphrases sobre Don Giovanni for cello octet. Mozart is again present in Variación e tema for violin and piano, and a brief quote from Parsifal is used in Pentimento. On the other hand, inspired by the eponymous pictorial gesture of unveiling as an articulating element of discourse, as I have mentioned before. In these commented examples, as well as in other equally noteworthy cases, the creative work that the author does in composing this dialogue is far removed from consisting only of a direct forging of the original materials. He rather seeks to capture the essence of pre-existing pieces, to distill this under an appearance that does not hide or disguise, but more appropriately exhibits links to the model. And he admits that in some cases very eloquent. For example, his 3 fantasias. These 3 fantasias have to do, sorry, is repeated? No. No, sorry. These fantasias is, for example, a piece for piano coming from opera, not any opera, but a special one, a fragment from Mozart, which has a supposed first series of 12 pitches. Non ci pasce di cibo celeste. It's not a series, but if you are an atonal, a contemporary composer, you can use that quotation to make a new composition, apparently related to Mozart and apparently related also to contemporary language. This is the Fantasia on Don Giovanni. The very interesting thing is that it's a triple shift, a shift of genre from opera to instrumental, a shift of timbre from vocal to orchestral, a shift of style from tonal to atonal, style of language, harmony. The same exactly is in the case of another piece, the 10th Fantasy on a Fantasy by Mudarra. The original is for vihuela, it shifts to orchestra. The original is for orchestra, takes vihuela, and the transformation. The context is atonal with modal echoes, making a process that takes a climax with a quotation. This is the Mudarra's Fantasia for vihuela. And all the shifts are meant to be postmodern because of the shift. What happens with crucifixus? Crucifixus, sorry. This work takes, besides the painting, an elegiac mood according to the required or much-like requisite. Conrado del Campo is taken as a model of composition. So Turina does not borrow materials from him, but simply proposes a reformulation of Del Campo's technique. He was acknowledged as the most Germanic Spanish composer because he was fond on both chromatic harmonies in a Wagnerian reading and contrapuntist and imitative textures. As a result, two quotations to Bach. The first one, Las in Kreutze, to the St. Matthew Passion, and the second one to the fourth fugue from Das Wolte Perit Clavier in C minor, in C sharp minor. They are special for two reasons, at least. First, they are highly chromatic patterns, so they fit exceptionally well in a natural harmonic language, as that typical from Turina. And on the other side, they both trace across a music symbol identified centuries ago, identified with commemorations as that around Conrado del Campo. Even more, these materials are plenty developed since a part of the score. And at the very beginning, I have only two more examples. At the very beginning, we have the pitches of those motifs separated in different parts, which are strictly consonant by pairs. There's the first apparition, the first presentation. After that, we can find a process of a contrapuntistic imitation based on that and on those specific materials. It's in the center of the piece. The piano acts as a signal to detonate it. And this is getting more and more dense and getting some structural points as this one, when it's possible to hear or to appreciate much density, but perfectly calculated by proportions, rhythmic proportions, and so. In other phases, the writing is flexible, but time is not, so I want to end. And what I wanted to present here is a case of a study case on a composer for whom these components are very interesting. And I think that I am a structural analyst, so I'm not here in a semiotic conference. But I realize perfectly that with structuralist analysis, this kind of creations have no sense at all. It's very necessary to connect with many other fields of artistry, and in this case, those of synesthesia, the dialogues to the past, and yes, quotations, introduce many different perspectives to that kind of composition. Well, it's just an invitation to an argument, maybe, but that's all. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Carlos. Luckily for you and for us, conference, by the way, you're in a conference for musical signification, where synesthesia, dialogue to the past, and intertextuality are the most common and welcome topics. So, thank you very much for introducing us to this fascinating music that needs all sorts of analysis, I guess, not only the structural, but also, and you're including signification in the analysis. So,
of course, because if not, we could be reduced to be mathematicians describing things. And music, you can describe music, but only in order to after that introduce layers of interpretation. The first ones, in a functionalist point of view, maybe very close to the structural reality, but with more steps, with other kind of depths in the interpretation. And the last thing is to connect music with the cultural context. Of course. I devoted too many years to each class of theory. And it's very funny. It's excellent. In some music, is something you have to do. You have to do. But you have to improve it with the next step.
I agree. Marta, do you want to ask something?
Yes, you have found. Yes, thank you very much, and I would thank you very much. It is really very interesting. But I would like to mention one thing, that there is a very strong parallelism with a French composer. I don't know if you have heard about his name. His name is Hugues Dufour. And he is of the same generation of your composer, and it since about 15 years Dufour composes only on the basis of great how to say paintings, very great, very important. For example, to remain in Spain, he has written a piece which is I tell it in French, La Maison du Sourd. The house of, if you can translate it, the house of Goya, you know, and after he wrote pieces with how to say with paintings of Tiepolo, Europe and Asie of Tiepolo, and also Lucifer after Pollock, and La Tempesta after Giorgione, and so on. And there are Deluge après Poussin. It is for me, it is a very interesting point that they work both on this subject, paintings and music.
Thank you very much, because if I don't remember badly, the Dufour in Musique, Pouvoir, Écriture had announced such a shift, a shift in his career.
Yes. You are right. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Marta, and thank you to all of you. Now I'm afraid we need to run to the orchestra room for the closure, so we need to close the session. Thank you very much.